everybody, welcome to UK Gamer Network. I'm Brian, also known as UK Gen Zoidberg, and this is Retrogaming Superleagues. In this video we're going to be looking at all of the Halloween themed platform games that you could be playing on your A500 Mini, and we're going to rank them from best to worst. So as usual in these videos we're going to be ranking them in one of these 5 categories that you see before you. Essential, recommended, good, poor or rubbish. And we've got 20 games in total to go through today. Let's get on with the first one. First game on the list is The Addams Family, and it's probably unfair to start this list with a stone cold classic, but that's what happens sometimes if you stick to the alphabetical rule. This is probably the closest that anyone ever got to giving the Amiga their own version of Mario. It's got incredibly simple controls, actually uses the fire button to jump for a change, which makes it incredibly simple to play. I gave this one 94% in my original Amiga Action review, and the score today would be pretty close to that. I also did a re-review on this one last Halloween, so you can go back and watch that one if you want. The only real disappointment is the lack of the parallax scrolling that you get on the SNES version, but other than that the game is exactly the same, and there is only one place that this can go, and that's Essential. Next up we have Alien 3, which was made by Probe Software, and in the development of this game they made a lot of very sensible decisions. The only thing that this game has in common with the film that it's based on is Sigourney Weaver's bald head, because let's face it, the idea of making an action platform game based on a film with only one alien in it was probably not a good idea. Although it was proven many years later that you can make a decent game with only one alien in it, a very good one in fact. Another good decision was the fact that this supports a 2-button joystick, meaning that back in the day I could play it with my Mega Drive joypad on the Amiga. All these years later it's still a very enjoyable if unforgiving platform game, and I think it falls just short of the Essential grade, so I'm going to put it in the recommended. Next up we have Asteroth, the Angel of Death, which was published by Hewson Software in 1989. Without question, Hewson were one of the best publishers of games on the 8-bit systems, but as far as I'm concerned, they really struggled when they moved to the Atari ST and Amiga. This game is a prime example. It's nowhere near as good as their output on the 8-bit systems. Everything in this game just screams of it being an upgraded version of an 8-bit game, with random enemy attack patterns and very basic graphics. But worst of the lot is the fact that there is no clear objective, and you'll just find yourself wandering aimlessly from screen to screen. I didn't enjoy this one at all, so this is going to go in the rubbish category. Next up we have Beyond the Ice Palace from Elite Systems, who after their great success converting Ghosts and Goblins, which is a game that's coming up later, Elite made this, which is a very enjoyable, if short, slice of arcade action. Although it must also be said that the Amiga version is not quite as enjoyable as the Commodore 64 or Spectrum version. Everything is fast moving and the controls are responsive, and there's a nice variety provided by giving the player a choice of weapons, so you don't have to so each time you restart the game you can try something a little different. Shame that there's only 3 levels in it overall, but it's always better to leave people wanting more, and I'm going to stick this in the good category. Next up we have Black Tiger, which is another US Gold arcade conversion. We've had many of those on the Super League so far. This one was released in 1990, and it's an arcade conversion that is a very lazy port of an already poor Atari ST version. To be fair to the graphic artists, it does actually look the part, especially if you place it alongside the arcade original, but as soon as everything starts moving it falls apart completely. It has bad controls, jerky movement, and the scrolling makes it look a complete mess. It all adds up to a game that you should try your best to forget ever existed, and this one's going straight into the rubbish bin, below Asteroth. Next up we have the Amiga version of Castlevania, which was published in 1990 by Konami themselves. There aren't many games whose name form part of an entire genre, so there's no arguing about where Castlevania sits in gaming history. But this shoddy Amiga version, however, converted by Novatrade, is not worthy of the name. Somehow it doesn't even manage to look as good as the NES version, and it features completely unresponsive controls and horribly jerky scrolling. We know the Amiga is capable of so much better. Unfortunately for UK gamers, this one only came out in the US, which was a lucky escape for us really. This one's going straight in the rubbish category and below the 2 games that are in there already. Next up we have the first Halloween game for kids. This is Count Duckula, which was released by Alternative Software in 1990, based on a fantastic kids cartoon series. It only really classes as horror because of the connection to the works of Bram Stoker. It's a budget game in every sense of the word, with only a very tenuous connection to the TV series that inspired it. It's almost as if the game existed before the license was attached. Imagine that. Would have been perfectly fine as a £2 game on the 8-bit systems, but even at £8 on the Amiga, it was overpriced. There's nowhere else this can go really other than the poor category. Next up we have Death Trap from Anko Software, also released in 1990. This one sees you navigating a haunted house, shooting ghosts and monsters, and it's a surprisingly enjoyable game all round really. It stands out from other similar titles thanks to a power-up system that sees you mixing coloured potions to create your weapons. The unfortunate inclusion of random attack patterns and traps that you have no way of anticipating until they've killed you at least once stop it from being better. And it's particularly annoying that you have to restart from the beginning of each level if you happen to die. So it's going to go in the good category, but I think just below Beyond the Ice Palace. Next up we have Elvira the arcade game, released by Flare Software in 1991. As well as appearing in 2 great point-and-click adventure games from Horrorsoft, the horror icon Elvira also appeared in this platform game, which is great looking, but ultimately pretty forgettable. You can choose one of 2 levels to play when you first load it up, but there are only 3 overall, and they're all pretty huge, featuring plenty of enemies to kill, but it's all painfully bland, and there are too many instances of blind jumps where you've got no idea where you're going to land. Nothing kills a platform game more than being unable to see where you're supposed to be landing. For me, this one goes in the poor category, I'm afraid. Great graphics can't save bad gameplay. Next up we have Fire and Brimstone, which is made by Vectordine. The same year that they made the original James Pond, they also made this Ghosts and Goblins style Norse adventure, which despite some good graphics and music, there's no way I can recommend it. Gameplay is almost entirely trial and error, forcing the player to do each screen exactly as the makers intended. I must have been killed by the guard on the first screen at least 20 times before I realised that all you had to do was simply stand still and let him walk past you. A few clues to that kind of thing would have helped immensely. So this is going to go in the poor category as well, but I think this one's going to go just above Elvira. Next up we have Ghost Battle from Thalion, which is the entire reason that we're doing this list today. If you haven't already seen last week's re-review video, make sure you go back and watch that now. It's a fun but flawed game with excellent presentation overall, but ultimately though the gameplay is a little bit too slow and difficult to sustain your interest over long periods. The lack of level codes definitely hurts the experience overall. It's still enjoyable, definitely, but file this one under interesting curiosity. I can't really place it higher than the good category, but as far as I'm concerned, it's better than the games that are in there already. So I'm going to put it above Beyond the Ice Palace. Next up we have Ghosts and Goblins from Elite Software, which was released in 1990. And considering the state of some arcade conversions on the Amiga, it's almost a miracle that Elite's version of this is as good as it is. It's not arcade perfect. There are differences that only somebody who's played the arcade version as much as me would notice. Also, having to push up on a joystick to jump because you're using a single button joystick makes some of the jumps a little bit tricky, but it's hard to imagine how this conversion could have been any better. So I'm going to put this in the recommended category, but I think Alien 3 just pips it. Yeah, next up we have Ghouls and Ghosts, and it was a fantastic idea to give this iconic arcade game to the same development team that made Bubble Bobble, but ultimately the results were nowhere near as good. This one weirdly came out the year before Elite's version of the first game. It has all of the features of the arcade original, but it's nowhere near as exciting to play because it feels there's a distinct lack of enemies, and it just feels very empty overall. The play area on screen is really small, and the controls aren't particularly responsive either. Stick with Ghosts and Goblins over this one. I'm going to put this down in the poor category, just below Elvira. Next up we have Horror Zombies from the Crypt, which came out in 1991 from Millennium Software. And before you even get to the game itself, it's clear that the makers of this game have absolutely nailed the aesthetic that they're going for. It has the look, sound and feel of the horror movies that inspired it. The majority of this atmosphere though is completely eroded as soon as you start playing the game, especially with you play with the sound effects switched on, as this features some of the most out of place noises I've ever heard in a game. Couple this with gameplay that features traps that are completely indistinguishable from things that won't kill you, and you have a game that looks great but is ultimately incredibly frustrating to play. Shame really. I'm going to stick this one just below Death Trap in the good category. Next up we have Maria Renard's Revenge, which has only just come out this year. You can download this one off the Itch.io website for about £13. And remember when I said that the Amiga could do much better than the version of Castlevania? This game shows you just how much better. It's smooth, playable and looks great, described by the people who made it as a Castlevania fan game and made with the Scorpion engine. It's an excellent game, more than worthy of your time. It does only feature 4 levels, however, and for me that's what stops it from being considered essential. So I'm going to put this just below Ghosts and Goblins in the recommended category. Next up is Risky Woods from 1992. I can remember playing this one for the first time back in 1992 and being massively surprised by it. Compared to all the previous games made by Dynamic Software, this is a massive leap in quality and proof that you should never write off a game just because of who made it. The graphics are amazing, even more so when you realise that it's on a standard A500 and not an A1200, and it features gameplay that's hard as nails but also addictive at the same time. Power-ups with negative effects and an in-game economy that puts the best weaponry at stupidly high prices almost ruin the experience. But I loved it back in 1992 and I love it now. I'm going to stick this one in the essential category, but the Addams Family is better. Next up we have Rygar, the legendary warrior. Whether this deserves to be included in this Super League is open for debate, but I would personally say that it's the same style of game as Ghosts and Goblins or Risky Woods, and it deserves to be compared alongside the two of those. It's another great arcade conversion from Geezer Games, but the problem with that is that the arcade version itself is not aging particularly well. The gameplay starts out fun, but it's far too repetitive to remain that way for very long. It does, however, get bonus points for including support for a 2-button joystick, which makes it a lot easier to play. This is going to go in the good category, but I'm going to put it between Ghost Battle and Beyond the Ice Palace. Next game is Super Cauldron, which was developed and published by Titus Software in 1993. This belated sequel to Cauldron, which was a great game on the Spectrum and Commodore 64, already felt out of date when it came out originally, and it's simply no fun to play today. It's got some decent cartoon style visuals from the same artists who were responsible for Crazy Cars 3 and Titus the Fox, but they're undone by some truly appalling push scrolling. There's no clear objective to any of the levels, and you're forced to use weaponry that makes killing the enemies a lot harder than it should be. It's frankly easy to see why I'd forgotten about this game's existence, so this one's going in the poor category, but I think I'll put it just above Fire and Brimstone. Next game is Vampire's Empire, which was released in 1988, published by Gremlin Graphics and developed by Magic Byte. It's a fairly interesting concept where you have to guide a beam of light, which is being reflected around the levels by mirrors, which you can use to take out the vampires. but the whole thing is scuppered by some truly awful controls. Also, when you compare it to the 8-bit versions, the levels in this Amiga version are way too big, meaning that you completely lose your bearings and have no idea where you're supposed to be going next. The graphics are fairly basic, but then it was released in 1988, but it ultimately feels like what it is, which is a game from the 8-bit era with 16-bit graphics. So there's nowhere else I can put this one really other than the poor category, and I'm going to put it between Ghouls and Ghosts and Count Duckula. And for the last game we have Wolfchild from 1992, developed by Core Design. And we're probably stretching the horror side of things a bit with this one, as although you do play as a werewolf in this one, you could quite easily swap out the wolf powers for a mech suit and the game would be no different. I'm going to include it though, as it has a fantastic intro showing your character transforming into the wolf for the first time, and every time you transform in-game, the sound and animation are both excellent. The game itself is definitely flawed though, as there are too many sections where you can miss a jump and find yourself having to repeat a massive chunk of a level. It's just about enjoyable enough to be worth playing though. I'm going to put this one in the good category, just above Ghost Battle. That's all 20 horror themed platform games that I could find on the Amiga. If there's anything that you feel like I've missed, then let me know in the comments. If you don't like where I've placed one of the games here, then please also tell me why you would have placed it higher or lower. These are, after all, only my opinions. I'm going to be back next week with another re-review, so hopefully I will see you then. Until then, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.